All right, we're going to attempt this. We're going to attempt to explain detoxification with Lego Pokemon. Hey, I'm Dr. Joyce Knieff. I just did a series on detoxification where a lot of you told me that I was a little bit too technical and it was difficult to understand. So I'm going to try to use, these are my daughters, and I'm going to try to explain glucuronidation with these. Okay, so this is not going to be the perfect analogy, but pretend this is a little estrogen that's floating around in your system. And once this estrogen goes into your liver is like, we don't need this anymore. This one's kind of old. And we have other exposures from estrogen, like we're making them through our ovaries and stuff, so we don't need this one anymore. Now, phase 1 detoxification is going to put a little marker on the estrogen. And now this can go back into circulation, but it's marked for detoxification. So once it goes through your liver again, then we have glucuronidation coming in, and just pretend this is a glucuronic acid and the little estrogen gets conjugated to it. If I can make this work, here we go. And this gets carried out into your intestines, and you get rid of that estrogen. Now the hiccup that can happen here is once the conjugated estrogen goes into your intestines, you can have gut bacteria that see this bond between the estrogen and the glucuronic acid and is like, oh my gosh, that looks like something I can cleave. And then it will whack it and break off the estrogen again. And because your intestines are really good at reabsorbing stuff, this can get reabsorbed into your system and increase your load of estrogen. So this was something that your body wanted to get rid of, and now it can't get rid of it because of this guy. And this is a bacteria that has high beta-glucuronidase activity. And yes, you can test for beta-glucuronidase activity in your stool. I know certain stool tests have this marker. GI effects is one that I know it does have. I'm not too sure. I know there are a bunch of other like GI maps and like gut zoomers and stuff like that. GI effects does have a marker for beta-glucuronidase, and you can test for its activity. So yeah, now what do we do, right? How do we make sure that when your liver goes through all of this work of putting your conjugated, like your hydroxylated estrogen onto a glycolic to glucuronidation to get rid of it, how do we make sure that beta-glucuronidase doesn't come in and whack it off? So one thing that we can do is get rid of the bacteria that has high beta-glucuronidase activity. And this can look like, you know, a kill phase of like herbals if you're treating SIBO, or it can use probiotics to try to outcompete this guy so that he's just not there as much anymore. Or you can use other terrain modifiers like short-chain fatty acids, or IgG immunoglobulins and stuff like that. But another thing that you can do is supplement with something that has a very similar bond here. So calcium D glucarate, CDG, has a very similar bond. And so if you introduce CDG into your gut and you have all of these other things here, now you have like 5 to choose from, right? And there is a possibility that this guy is, instead of breaking apart the bond here, will break apart this bond that's very similar here. Sorry, I can't get Squirtle's shell off, but you get the idea. Like if the beta-glucuronidase works on this bond from the calcium D glucarate instead of your conjugated estrogen, then your conjugated estrogen is free to become detoxified by your body, and you actually get rid of it. And I know there were a couple of questions I was being asked on the specific glucuronidation video here, which is like, would supplementing with CDG be a concern if your body already has low estrogen? And my inclination is to say that this is a no, because this estrogen, right? This estrogen is, okay, let me redo this here, right? Okay, so this estrogen is different from this estrogen because this estrogen has already gone through phase 1 detoxification. This estrogen was what your body was using. So the estrogen that you are trying to save is the stuff that your body was still using. This stuff your body is already trying to get rid of, so just let your body get rid of it. This is already in the trash can. It's already gone through phase 1 conjugation. It's already in a state that is not as useful for your body. If you allow this one to like recirculate, you're just going to increase your detoxification load. So no, supplementing with plain CDG is not going to affect the amounts of estrogen that your body was already using and recycling. This is a different story if you're giving something that pushes specifically phase 1 detoxification, because again, phase 1 detoxification is where you add that hydroxylation to the estrogen, so you're doing this to it. This is the stuff that you want if your estrogen is low. And so for example, something that pushes phase 1 detoxification, especially of estrogens, is something like DIM. So if you already have low estrogen, then maybe you don't want to get maybe you don't want to have DIM. But if you are having a problem with beta glucuronidase activity, then maybe you still want to give beta glucuronidase, because again, the estrogens that you're getting rid of are already the ones that have gone through phase 1. So hopefully this has helped make things a little bit easier to understand. If you have mold toxicity, the glutathione conjugation pathway is probably one of the most important pathways that you can work at. This is part 5 of my detoxification series, where I'm going through all of the detox pathways in a little bit more detail to figure out if there's one that's gunked up that's causing all of your problems, especially if you've been exposed to environmental toxicants like mold, heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides, and the like, and it's causing a lot of chronic illness for you. So with the glutathione conjugation pathway, it really helps detoxify mold, and it's probably one of the ones that are most important for detoxifying mold, but it also interacts with other pathways in a way that it can get compromised. The glutathione conjugation pathway is one of the phase 2 pathways where it's taking phase 1 toxicants, attaching a glutathione onto it, conjugating it with glutathione, and then being able to get rid of it. A lot of what gets processed through the glutathione conjugation pathway are environmental toxins. So people who have impaired glutathione conjugation pathway will have a lot of sensitivities. This is how you develop multiple chemical sensitivity. When you go into the grocery store and you walk down the laundry aisle and you're just blowing up with symptoms, this is why. Or it can be like any mild thing that you get exposed to, you have symptoms. This can be why. It's because your body can't handle processing the environmental toxicants. There's like some immune system sensitization, and you're going to have a lot more reactions. Now, the main cofactor for glutathione conjugation is glutathione, which is why when you mold detox, it's going to consume a lot of glutathione. And in order to build glutathione, you need the building blocks. So you can both build glutathione in your body. You create this from sulfur-containing amino acids like methionine or cysteine. It is created through something called the transsulfuration pathway, which comes down from homocysteine or cysteine. You also need enough glycine, glutamate, selenium, magnesium, riboflavin, vitamin C, and E. So all of these help create the glutathione that's needed in this pathway and to be able to recycle it after it's been used. The GST genes are the most implicated in the glutathione conjugation pathway, and these are actually pretty common deletions. So if you do genetic testing and find that you have like a GSTM1 null, where you have a deletion in this pathway, you might be more sensitive to mold and chemicals and maybe stress, because this pathway just doesn't, you just don't make glutathione quite as well. So usually this pathway is pretty straightforward, but where this can get complicated is it can interact with the sulfation pathway, especially if you have something like hydrogen sulfide SIBO. So my previous video was on the sulfation pathway, so if you just want to jump over to the sulfation pathway video, you can take a look at that. But basically the way that it interacts is that they both are dependent on, glutathione and like sulfur containing amino acids to be able to produce their cofactors. And one of the biggest issues here is that when cysteine is metabolized to form glutathione, it actually generates sulfite, and then that needs your body's sulfite oxidase enzyme to turn it back into sulfate, and sulfate is then used in the sulfation pathway. And if you watch the previous video, you'll know that when you have hydrogen sulfide SIBO, then you can get a lot of the sulfide overload, and that can irritate your gut immune system, your gut nervous system, and all of that. It can really cause more sulfur sensitivity, and this is what can happen if somebody takes glutathione or NAC in an attempt to push the glutathione conjugation pathway, but they end up reacting because by processing that cysteine, you're overloading on sulfide, and then that's causing more irritation to your system, and then your sulfate oxidase enzyme starts getting overloaded because the sulfate oxidase also bottlenecks with nutrients and cofactors that it needs. So you're using up a lot of the molybdenum and other B vitamins that you're needing to be able to process the sulfide into sulfate. So this can end in sort of like a crashing when you're taking too much of the glutathione and NAC, which, like, granted, isn't the fault of the glutathione conjugation pathway. It's more of an issue with the sulfation pathway, but it can really impair the glutathione conjugation pathway because of the glutathione conjugation pathway needing the glutathione and you not being able to synthesize the glutathione or intake the glutathione because the cysteine metabolism is getting gunked up or like overwhelmed, and the glutathione that you're taking is ending up contributing to your sulfur sensitivity instead of working to help your detoxification. So yeah, if you've ever taken glutathione and just not had a great time, this complex interaction is probably why, in which case then supporting the sulfide oxidase enzyme would probably be your best bet, and trying to get rid of any sort of hydrogen sulfide SIBO, that would be your best bet too, just to decrease your system's overload of sulfide so that the sulfide oxidase enzyme can catch up, giving it some molybdenum, giving it some B12 and other B vitamins in order to work properly, but also decreasing your exposure to sulfide just in general. And if you've watched this far, thank you so much. In the next video, I'm going to cover methylation, which, yes, is hugely impacted by like MTHFR and stuff like that. So yeah, stay tuned. And I've also been seeing some of your comments. There have been people asking me if I'm going to be able to come up with something visual to go through this a little bit more, because I know these words are really big and sound really technical. I am coming up with something, but let me just get through all of the parts first so that I can stay a little bit more organized, because if I go off on a tangent, I will just go off on the tangent. So thank you guys for watching, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Thanks. Okay, so this is a very complex topic on salicylate sensitivity, detoxification, and a lot of mold toxin overload. I'm going to attempt to do this justice, but I might have to do it in several different parts here. So first of all, your liver has, well, your body in general has 3 phases of detoxification, right? Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3. Phase 1 is that first pass throughout your liver. Phase 2 is when your liver catches it and puts it into your intestines. And Phase 3 is generally when that toxin becomes excreted and carried out of your intestines. And a lot of what we're concerned about is Phase 2, because when you have a preponderance of things that you need to detox, many times it goes through Phase 1. And the issue with Phase 1 detoxification is that a lot of the things that your liver runs through the first phase of actually ends up more toxic than the original thing before it ran through Phase 1 detox. So very commonly when you have a lot of like mold or other environmental toxin overload, like either plastics, molds, or like heavy metals and stuff like that, what you want to do is encourage Phase 2 detoxification in a way so that you want to go backwards, right? So you want to make sure Phase 3 is cleared, Phase 2 is cleared, Phase 1 is cleared, so that there's not this like weird piling up of intermediates that could cause you to flare throughout your detox process. So the 4 main Phase 2 sort of processes are glucuronidation, sulfation, methylation, and glutathione conjugation. There are also some minor ones like acetylation and amino acid conjugation, and like other really specialized one like selenation and thiocyanate formation and conjugation with other peptides. But in general, the main 4 that I mentioned before are the 4 that do most of the heavy lifting. And those 4 can be a little bit more compromised when you've had long-term mold exposure. Or like, you know, symptoms from mold because you have some of these enzymes that you either have like a genetic SNP where they just like work a little bit slower than everyone else, and therefore you get more buildup because your detox pathways aren't working quite as well. So if we're talking about treatment planning and what to do about this, it has a lot to do with which processes are not working well in your body and which specific ones are impacting you the most. So for example, glucuronidation has a lot to do with the gut microbiome. So you want to be able to, if you want to be able to support glucuronidation and successful glucuronidation, the first thing that you do have to do is make sure that you have lower activity of beta glucuronidase in your gut. A lot of bacteria, especially not like bacteria that are a little bit more opportunistic, have higher activity of beta glucuronidase, which will undo glucuronidation from your liver and cause the toxins to cycle. So to be able to address this, you have to maybe inhibit that by using something like calcium D-glucuronate. I can't say that right now. Or like say glucuronidation fast a few times. It trips up my tongue. Taking calcium D-glucuronate in order to block the glucuronidase activity of the bacteria, or starting to try to revise the gut microbiome in a little bit to inhibit that beta glucuronidase activity. And still, if you're inhibiting beta glucuronidase activity, that's still kind of a little bit of a stopgap, right? Like you're making sure that your glucuronidation is going through so that you can move into phase 3 detoxification. Because what happens with glucuronidation, in the most part, is that it usually doesn't have trouble going through phase 2. It's around phase 3 where it breaks down. So if you want to encourage glucuronidation, then you can treat directly towards glucuronidation by addressing the phase 3 hiccups that might be happening that undo your glucuronidation. And you can kind of sort these through like sulfation, glutathione conjugation, and methylation as well. I know methylation is like a really popular right now because like the MTHFR mutation has gained like so much traction in the recent years. This video is getting really long. Let me do a part 2 and maybe a part 3, and I might reorganize how I'm approaching this, because this commenter also talked a lot about hydrogen SIBO, or like hydrogen sulfide SIBO, and that is a little different from like the sulfation process. It does make the patient, like if you have hydrogen sulfide SIBO, it will make you sensitive to sulfur or like sulfur containing herbs. You can, in those cases, sometimes still be able to supplement with sulfur-containing amino acids that will help sulfation, but not irritate the hydrogen sulfide SIBO. But you can do that pretty carefully, like if you supplement like methionine or taurine or something in small doses. But I think from like my standpoint, in terms of like treating this from a top-down, bottom-up standpoint, I would want to get rid of the hydrogen sulfide SIBO first. So let me redo the series sort of, and like talk about this from the standpoint of like, if we were going to treat the mold, we may need to treat the blowout of the gut and the hydrogen sulfide SIBO first. So hope this helps. Not tolerating fats, not tolerating salicylates, and not tolerating perhaps like being exposed to industrial solvent scents. These are all related to amino acid conjugation. Hey, this is part 8 of my detoxification series, where I'm going into really deep depth on all the phases of detoxification, including phase 1 and phase 2 pathways. And this one is on the phase 2 pathway, amino acid conjugation. So one of the most important roles the amino acid conjugation has is actually conjugating bile acids in the role of detoxification. Now, this isn't directly a phase 2 aspect, but it is also important in just like general detoxification in general. So again, the reason why phase 2 is important is because when you get exposed to a toxicant, say for this example, salicylates, your body is going to run that through the liver, go through phase 1 detoxification. Many times the intermediary that comes out of phase 1 is more toxic than the first thing that happened, and you have to run that intermediary through a phase 2 pathway in order to properly remove it from your body. So in most cases with amino acid conjugation, you're taking that intermediary, attaching an amino acid to it, and then getting rid of it. Now, this attachment step is also done with bile acids, because when your liver first makes bile acids, they are fat soluble. What that means is they're only dissolvable in fat. And if you know anything about the function of bile, bile is supposed to break up fat in your diet. So when you eat fat, and you digest it, the bile is supposed to make the fat into smaller globules so that your intestines can absorb it better. And this only happens with conjugated bile acids, because when the bile acids are unconjugated, they are fat soluble, so they'll just kind of merge with the fat that you have in your intestines. When you attach an amino acid to it, that end becomes water soluble and this end remains fat soluble. So what this does is you've actually created a little tiny soap molecule here, and this thing is what makes it so that this can break up the surface tension, so to say. I know that's not the right word probably, but it breaks up the big fat globules in your diet into smaller pieces so that your intestines then have a better time absorbing it. And it works because with this fat end and with this water soluble end, the fat end is going to go to the fat that you ate, and the water end is going to make it so that basically the rest of the juices in your stomach can carry this along. And when this thing surrounds a small fat globule, it becomes these little tiny pockets called micelles that you can then absorb. Now, that entire bit is also really important for cholesterol metabolism, and that specifically has to do with taurine attaching to the bile acid. So taurine is one of the amino acids in amino acid conjugation that can attach to unconjugated bile acids to conjugate them. In detoxification, there are other amino acids that kind of attach to other toxicants to get rid of them in phase 2 detoxification. And possibly the most common donor, the amino acid that is used in amino acid conjugation, is glycine. And glycine is also really, really implicated in a lot of neurotransmitter detoxification, so it's a really important amino acid to have enough of. Then you also have glutamine, arginine, and ornithine that help conjugate nitrogen type wastes that are happening in the urea cycle, so preventing you from having a buildup of ammonia. So very often you're not going to have really great amino acid conjugation if you're on a lower protein diet or you have any sort of protein wasting of sorts. And if you have compromised amino acid conjugation, then very often you'll have things like sensitivity to salicylates, bioflow issues where you can have bile stones or sludgy bile or anything else like that, or from a nitrogen front, if you have a buildup of ammonia, then you can have fatigue and brain fog and just not feeling great. So yeah, perhaps the most important amino acids in amino acid conjugation are glycine, taurine, and glutamine, although we also have other amino acids that can connect to the thing that you want to get rid of and then get rid of them. But yeah, the phase 2 detoxification role that amino acid conjugation plays in ASIDE, I think its more important role is to create that conjugated bile acid, because that conjugated bile acid is going to help you move bile from your gallbladder into your intestines. And remember, all of the other phase 2 detoxification pathways, they are moving those toxicants into your bile. So if you're not moving your bile from your gallbladder into your intestines, then you're not getting rid of all that toxic stuff anyway. And quick answer to the question that I know will be asked, this still is the process if you don't have a gallbladder. So if you don't have a gallbladder, your liver will still continue to make bile. The solubility is still important. It just doesn't have anywhere to store the bile. The bile just kind of drips into your intestines, especially when you are very fresh out of that surgery. The bile will just kind of drip into your intestines. Now, there's been some studies looking at people who have had their gallbladders removed years ago, 20 years ago when they were younger. And what they've found is that the body can actually adapt where part of the bile duct becomes a little bit of a storage system for the bile. So the body is kind of incredible in this way, where you basically make a functional gallbladder out of pieces that you have left, and you still are able to store bile and release it in a little bit more timely fashion when you get exposed to digestive signals, like you're eating food or you smell food or something like that. So pretty cool stuff. So yeah, thanks for sticking around. In the next video, I'll talk finally about phase 3 detoxification. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and I will get to them after I finish off this series. Thank you. All right, so we all know that a lot of chronic illness can be caused by mold exposure and compromised detoxification, and maybe genetic mutations that affect your ability to detoxify certain things, certain exposures that you might have. So what exactly goes into detoxification? This is part 1 of a series, and I'm going to attempt to kind of run through the way your body detoxifies things, specifically through your liver, and why this can break down and cause a lot of chronic illness. This gets a little bit complicated. So in general, there are 3 phases of detoxification: phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. A breakdown in any part of these detoxification pathways can cause extra symptoms. A lot of what your body gets exposed to, things like excess hormones, plastics, mold, heavy metals, other types of exposures that you might encounter in the environment, or you're eating, or your body is producing and you need to get rid of the excess of, that will go through phase 1 detoxification. Phase 1 detoxification is your liver enzymes. A lot of the liver, so like medications play a huge role in this too. Liver enzymes are those CYP enzymes that we hear about a lot. Liver enzymes are the reason why you can't or you shouldn't eat grapefruit with certain types of medications. They're the reason why you shouldn't drink with certain types of medications. This is phase 1 detoxification. Very many times produces an intermediary that is more toxic than the original thing. And this is the reason why some people metabolize, like, say, coffee really fast, or some people are really not great for, like, not really great at alcohol. So, like, a very stereotypical thing is, like, Asians can't drink alcohol, right? Because we have enzymes that have really fast phase 1 metabolism, but maybe not as fast phase 2 metabolism. So the alcohol hits our bodies, we run through the phase 1 really quickly and actually end up with a lot of intermediaries from the alcohol that are more toxic than the alcohol. So we feel those effects really strongly, really fast. So now think about this happening in a patient who has mold exposure, right? So mold is very commonly metabolized through these CYP enzymes, and they can clog up the enzymes because your body really wants to get rid of them. So you can run through phase 1 really fast with mold and then end up with a lot of toxic intermediaries that are, really gunk up your phase 2 enzymes too. And this can be exacerbated if you are already on medications that need these enzymes to be processed through your liver as well. And the kicker with this is that a lot of mold toxins can actually induce phase 1, which makes those enzymes work a little faster because your body does want to get rid of those mold toxins, right? And that actually pushes out more toxic intermediaries that are floating around your body even faster than it can be resolved by the phase 2 detoxification process. And this is one of the reasons why a lot of people who have exposure to mold will start feeling like really wired, inflamed, and like their immune systems will start going a little bit crazy because you have more toxic intermediaries just floating around in your system. And this is also what makes detoxification so complicated with people who have mold exposure or other chemical sensitivities that they have an overload over, whether that be like pesticides or herbicides or whatnot. Because you can't just give like a detox protocol for them. It will not work if you don't understand where they're at in terms of like what phase of detoxification is the bottleneck here. Because one very, very common detoxification supplement is something like DIM, right? But the thing about DIM is that it pushes the CYP enzyme. So it induces the enzymes. That's inducing phase 1. If the issue is between phase 1 and phase 2, and it's not so much that you have the things in your body, but more that you're running through phase 1 so quickly, you're getting buildup between phase 1 and phase 2, like more of those toxic intermediaries, you're going to make your symptoms worse. So if you are pushing phase 1 without supporting phase 2, this is where a lot of mold patients start detox protocols and they absolutely blow out because you're inducing phase 1 while their phase 2 is really, really slow, or they have something going on with phase 3 that's not helping that remove that toxins through their bodies. So this is a really important granular thing to understand about detoxification, especially when detoxing people who have long-term exposure to mold. So in patients with mold toxicity, especially with patients who have that experience of going through a detox protocol and really reacting to it, sometimes we might even want to see if we can give herbs or other substances that are inhibitors of the CYP enzymes just to slow down that phase 1 detoxification pathway a little bit more so that phase 2 can catch up. So yeah, this is the part about phase 1 and what phase 1 has to do in terms of the role of detoxification, what can happen to it, and how do you make sure that your phase 2 is working fast enough that the intermediaries exist in your body for the smallest amount of time possible, because this is really going to make sure that detox happens in a way that makes you not react quite as much or blow up your symptoms quite as much. So part 2, I'm going to talk a little bit more about phase 2, how to support phase 2, and then I'll go into more details and more parts about each part of phase 2, because phase 2 is really complicated. Thanks. Hopefully this helps. You cannot detox appropriately, especially not from like mold or other environmental toxicants, if you have chronic constipation. I lost count of which part this is, but this is the last part of my series on detoxification, going in depth into environmental toxicant exposure, how that contributes to chronic disease, and how do you successfully detox from these. I know this series has been a little bit more informational, but it's important to kind of like get the information out there before we really go into like the solution planning. So just as a quick recap, when your body is trying to get rid of something that's toxic, it takes the toxic thing, it runs it through your liver, it runs it through phase 1. Phase 1 will oftentimes attach a thing to the thing and make it a little bit more toxic than it originally was. You do not want to have your phase 1 intermediaries rolling around your body, because that's often what causes symptoms. In order to catch these intermediaries, you need to send them through phase 2 detoxification. Now, phase 2 detoxification has multiple pathways that it can go through. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure sort of thing. And then phase 2 generally will put the declawed phase 1 intermediaries, so to say, make them more soluble, put them in the bile. And now it is the phase 3 pathway's job to be able to carry this toxic thing that you've conjugated out of your body, and so that you don't have to deal with it anymore. So on a more literal level, this is kind of what phase 3 looks like. Once the bile comes out of your liver, and your liver has different transporters that are like attributed to phase 3, what that means is that every time you have a phase 2 conjugation, it's still like kind of in your liver, right? And then there's like transporters that move that thing out of your liver into bile. Technically, on a broader level, phase 3 accounts for the bile into poop, and also kidneys into urine, and to a smaller degree, like the way that you detoxify through your breath and your skin as well. But let's focus on bile into poop right now. So the important piece about this is all of the toxic stuff that you put in your bile, you want to make sure that gets out of your body instead of being recirculated. I say recirculated because your body is really, what's the word? It's scrappy is not the right word, but it's really resourceful. It's really resourceful when it makes bile acids, because bile acids have a very helpful function in being able to digest your fats, and they're somewhat energy intensive to make bile acids. Your body wants to reabsorb the bile acids and like just use them. This is actually a very important function of the body, because there are some instances in which like people don't have the last part of their small intestine or more of their small intestine, and they haven't supplemented with bile acids, that if you make the liver make bile acids from scratch all the time, you can actually go into liver failure. So this is actually a really important part of the body. That aside, when you're trying to detoxify, you don't want like 90% of like a very high percentage of your bile acids being reabsorbed by the last part of your intestines, because what comes with it is the stuff that you were trying to get rid of. So in phase 3 detoxification, here's what you want things to look like. You want to have your bile come out of your gallbladder, be captured by either a binder or something like high fiber in your food, and have that move through your small intestines in a way that the bile is now like complex or bound up in the binder or the fiber, so that your small intestines can't reabsorb whatever is in this big mess over here. The reabsorption is called enteric hepatic recirculation, and that's the thing that we're trying to work against when we were working in detoxification. And now here's the big obstacle in phase 3 detoxification as it comes with like mold detox, because bile acids also have a signaling role in your small intestine, where when your bile comes out into the first part of your small intestines, it signals something called the migrating motor complex. And the migrating motor complex is this coordinated action that goes through your entire intestine that makes it so that things move and then you can poop it out. Now, if you bind up all of the bile acids, then this signaling action isn't really there. And so bile, it will actually, so the contractions can still be there, but with bile, when it dumps into the duodenum, it produces a breaking, this breaking action in the last part of your small intestine where it kind of stops it, and then it moves the front part so that the coordination can like move down in a good way that moves things actually out of your digestive system. Now, if you are trying to detoxify from mold toxins, and this is why the really strong protocols don't work for all people. Like for some people where their bile flow is intact and they have nothing going on besides mold toxicity, this can work for them. But if somebody has like chronic SIBO, mold toxicity that has caused a lot of immune system dysfunction, that has predisposed them to MCAS and other sort of immune system dysfunction, then giving harsh binders can cause more problems than not, because if you're going to give a harsh binder like Welchol or cholestyramine, then what that will do is it will bind up a lot of the bile acids and actually prevent it from signaling. And the most common side effect of really strong binders like that is constipation. And if you can't move that chunk of clay bile thing out, then you're not going to detoxify appropriately. So in my clinical practice, at the very least, the most important part is to keep things moving. We can use gentler binders at first, but it's important that even with you would rather weaker binding in a way that moves out than stronger binding that kind of just sits there in your intestines, because that can irritate a lot more other things and cause a lot more immune system dysfunction or originated from the gut. And also, like, the bile has so many other functions that we both know and don't know about. So having appropriate amount of bile signaling in your small intestine can also stabilize mast cells in your small intestine. So if you have an MCAS and you bind up all of your bile, then you are more likely to have like more histamine responses in your small intestine if you just have completely bombed up all of your bile acids. So with phase 3 detoxification, the most important part is the movement of your intestines. You would rather have a weaker binder than intestines that don't move at all. And because I know this is a question that's going to be asked, activated charcoal, yes, that is a binder that is on the medium weak side-ish of the line. Zeolite clay is a little bit stronger because it's a little bit more charged. The strongest binders for sure are going to be like Welchol or like cholestyramine that are frequently used in mold detox protocols. I would say probably the gentlest binder is going to be something like a modified citrus pectin, because it's low molecular weight. It kind of binds, but is also very anti-inflammatory in its signaling in certain areas. Like chlorella is probably like a step just above that. So there's like a whole spectrum of binders that can be used. But again, you want to make sure that the intestines are moving. So regardless of the binders, you can have binders, but if you have a functional constipation or like a slow motility because of something like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that really needs to be addressed first to be able to clear phase 3 before you go into supporting phase 2 detoxification. And phase 2 detoxification has to be supported before you go into phase 1 detoxification, and that's where you can, once these 3 phases are cleared, is where you can really then push detox harder, use stronger herbals to make sure that your liver is conjugating, producing bile, and getting rid of it. So yeah, that's the end of the detoxification series. Let me know if you have any lingering questions. I will talk about the sulfation gridlock, so that's in the future plan, just so that you guys know. Thank you.